No light reaches this place. Not sunlight, not moonlight, not even the faint glow of distant stars. Nearly 4 kilometers beneath the Atlantic Ocean, the world becomes something else entirely. Cold, crushing, silent in a way humans were never meant to experience. This is where the Titanic rests. Not floating, not sleeping, but slowly dissolving under pressure so extreme that steel bends like paper and sound itself seems afraid to exist. For more than 100 years, the wreck of the Titanic has been treated like a grave, a warning, a legend frozen in time. People spoke about it in hushed tones, as if the ocean itself might be listening. But recently something changed. A drone went inside, not around the ship, not above the deck where cameras have traveled before. Inside, through collapsed hallways, past rusted doorways, into spaces no human eye had ever seen. And what it found was not treasure, not beauty, not answers that bring comfort. What it found was horrifying, not because of monsters, not because of ghosts, but because of what time, pressure, and the ocean have done to one of humanity's greatest symbols of confidence. When the Titanic set sail in April 1912, it was more than a ship. It was a statement, a declaration that humans had finally mastered nature. Newspapers called it unsinkable. Engineers praised its watertight compartments. Passengers boarded believing this voyage was safer than walking down a city street. Inside, the ship felt alive. Grand staircases gleamed under electric lights. Crystal chandeliers shimmered. Dining rooms echoed with laughter, music, and the clinking of fine china. There were Turkish baths, a swimming pool, private promenades, and quiet corners where letters were written and dreams were shared. Below all of that, far from the luxury, the ship worked endlessly. Boilers burned day and night. Engines roared. Men shoveled coal until their lungs filled with dust and heat. The Titanic breathed through steam and steel until it didn't. When the iceberg struck, it didn't rip the ship apart in a dramatic explosion. It whispered its damage, a series of small wounds along the hull. Quiet, almost polite. Too polite to cause panic. By the time people realized what was happening, the Atlantic had already decided their fate. Over 1,500 people never made it back to the surface, and the ship vanished into darkness. For decades, no one knew exactly where the Titanic lay. The ocean hid it well. Depths that crush submarines. Cold that freezes machinery. Darkness so complete it erases direction. Some imagined the ship resting upright, preserved like a museum. Others believed it had been torn apart beyond recognition. When it was finally found, the truth was worse. The Titanic had broken in half. The bow and the stern lay separated across the ocean floor, surrounded by a massive debris field. Shoes, plates, furniture, personal belongings scattered like memories ripped apart. It wasn't peaceful, it was violent. Even then, explorers stayed outside. The wreck was unstable, collapsing, unsafe. Going inside was considered too risky, and to many too disrespectful, until technology changed the rules. Modern underwater drones don't carry humans. They don't need oxygen. They don't feel fear. They are small, flexible, and designed to go where people cannot. Scientists didn't send the drone inside out of curiosity alone. They had questions. Is the ship collapsing faster than expected? Are internal structures still standing? How long before the Titanic completely disappears? Because that is the truth no one likes to admit. The Titanic is dying. Iron-eating bacteria are slowly consuming it from the inside out. Every year, more ceilings collapse, more walls give way, more rooms turn into caves of rust and silt. So the drone was deployed, quietly, carefully. As it slipped through a broken opening in the hull, its lights cut through water that had not been disturbed in over a century. At first, nothing seemed shocking. Rusted beams, flaking metal, clouds of sediment rising with every movement. Then the scale became clear. Hallways that once echoed with footsteps were crushed into narrow tunnels. Doors hung open at impossible angles. Ceilings sagged, held up only by corroded ribs of steel. Everything was brown, orange, peeling away in thin layers that trembled at the slightest disturbance. This wasn't a ship anymore. It was a skeleton. The drone moved deeper. It entered what had once been a passenger corridor. Faint traces of paint still clung to the walls, decorative patterns barely visible, like fading memories of elegance. But the floor was gone. Below was nothing but darkness. Entire decks had collapsed into one another, creating vertical shafts where rooms once stacked neatly. The drone hovered, its lights sweeping downward. And that's when something unsettling became clear. The Titanic didn't just break when it sank. It is still breaking, right now. Every second, millions of tons of water press inward. Every year, bacteria eat more iron. Every shift of the ocean causes subtle movements. The ship is slowly folding in on itself. Then came the personal items: a shoe, half buried in sediment, a twisted metal bed frame, a porcelain sink still attached to a wall that no longer had a floor. These objects weren't arranged neatly. They were trapped, frozen mid-story. The drone drifted past what appeared to be a bathtub, its edges eaten thin, its interior filled with ocean mud. A place of comfort turned into part of the sea. And then the drone reached a space that made even seasoned researchers pause: the grand staircase, the most famous interior of the Titanic. In reality, it no longer exists. The drone found only an empty vertical void. Where beauty once stood, there was nothing but darkness and drifting particles. It felt wrong, like looking at a missing organ inside a body. Then the drone went somewhere no one expected, past crushed beams, past rooms no longer recognizable, into an area never mapped before. Sediment swirled, visibility dropped, and then something shifted. A section of ceiling collapsed silently into the darkness below. No sound, no warning. Just gravity finishing what time had started. And in that moment, a terrifying realization formed. The drone wasn't just observing history, it was witnessing the final phase. Because what it recorded next suggested something far more disturbing. Some parts of the Titanic are collapsing far faster than anyone predicted. And what's happening inside the ship means that soon, there may be nothing left to explore at all. The drone continued forward, slowly, carefully. Its lights pushed into spaces that had not seen movement since the night the ship went down. Water drifted through broken corridors like a quiet fog, carrying particles of rust and silt that looked almost like snow falling upward. This part of the ship felt different, heavier, as if the ocean itself was pressing closer. The walls here were thicker, the metal darker, the shapes less decorative and more brutal. This was no longer the world of passengers and polished surfaces. This was the working heart of the ship. The place that kept the Titanic alive. The engine rooms. Before the sinking, this area was chaos in motion. Pistons hammering, steam screaming through pipes, men shouting over deafening noise. Heat so intense it blurred vision and burned skin. Now, there was nothing. No sound, no movement, no warmth. Just enormous machines sitting in darkness, frozen mid-purpose. The drone's lights swept across massive engine cylinders, each one taller than a house. Their surfaces were coated in thick rust, peeling away in long curls that drifted gently when disturbed. Some parts looked almost intact, others were collapsing. One engine casing had split open, its interior exposed like a wound. Inside, metal gears were fused together by corrosion, as if the ocean had decided to weld them permanently in place. This machinery was never meant to be submerged, never meant to be silent, and yet here it was, slowly being erased. The drone moved lower, passing through a gap where a floor had completely disappeared. Beneath it, another level waited in darkness. This drop wasn't part of the original design. It was created by collapse. Entire decks had pancaked downward over time, crushing spaces together and trapping objects in impossible positions. Pipes ran nowhere. Ladders led to nothing. Doorways opened into open water. The ship no longer followed human logic. Then the drone's lights caught something unexpected. A gauge, still attached to a wall. Its glass face was gone, but the needle remained, frozen in place. No one knew what it was measuring anymore. Pressure, steam, temperature, time. Whatever it once tracked had stopped mattering a century ago, and yet it stayed. Like the ship itself, refusing to fully let go. As the drone drifted onward, the space narrowed. Twisted beams formed a tight passage, forcing the drone to tilt and adjust to slip through. Sediment stirred with every movement, creating a hazy cloud that reduced visibility to just a few feet. This was the danger zone. One wrong move, one vibration too strong, and the ceiling could come down. The drone paused, hovering in place as its lights scanned ahead. That's when something unsettling appeared. Not an object, a shape. At first it looked like nothing more than a pile of debris, broken metal, collapsed framework. But then the outline became clearer, a pair of boots, still upright, still positioned as if someone had been standing there. The rest of the body was gone. No bones, no clothing, just the boots, preserved by the same strange chemistry that eats steel but sometimes leaves leather behind. The ocean had erased the person, but kept the footprint of their last moment. The drone did not linger. It moved on, deeper, past boilers that had ruptured during the sinking, past valves locked forever in the open position, past pipes bent as if squeezed by invisible hands. This was where many of the crew had been when the ship went down. They didn't have lifeboats nearby. They didn't have open decks above them. They had orders to keep the ship running for as long as possible. Some stayed at their posts until the very end. And now, the drone was moving through the aftermath of that decision. The light swept across a wall covered in thick rust formations, hanging like stalactites. These weren't just signs of decay. They were alive. Colonies of bacteria slowly consuming the iron, turning solid steel into fragile lace. Every rusticle meant less structure, less support, less time. The drone turned a corner and entered a chamber that looked almost hollowed out. The floor here had collapsed completely, revealing a vast open cavity beneath. Beams hung down like broken ribs. Sections of wall trembled slightly as the current passed through. This part of the ship was failing, actively. Scientists later realized that this area was collapsing faster than models predicted. The pressure here was uneven, the metal thinner, the bacteria more aggressive. The Titanic wasn't disappearing evenly. It was rotting from the inside out. The drone descended carefully into the cavity. Below, it found something that sent a chill through even the most experienced researchers. A doorway, still framed, still recognizable. Beyond it, darkness. This door once led to a small room, possibly a workspace, possibly storage, possibly somewhere a crew member had taken shelter in those final minutes. No one knew. The drone's lights crossed the threshold. Inside, the room was barely intact. One wall had fallen inward. The ceiling sagged dangerously low. The floor was buried beneath thick layers of sediment, and then the camera caught it. A metal hook mounted on the wall, empty. Hooks like this were often used for hanging equipment, or clothing, or life vests. The hook was bent slightly downward, as if something heavy had once pulled on it. The drone hovered there longer than planned. Because this wasn't just structure, it was evidence, not of how the ship was built, but of how people lived and died inside it. As the drone began to pull back, the water around it suddenly grew cloudy. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Something had shifted again. Somewhere above, metal scraped against metal, not loud enough to hear, but clear enough to see. Dust and rust rained down like slow-motion ash. The drone backed away instinctively. This was the moment scientists later described as the most unsettling, not because of what the drone saw, but because of what it almost didn't escape. As it retreated, the camera briefly captured the ceiling collapsing behind it. A cascade of debris filled the space the drone had just occupied moments before. If it had hesitated, if it had moved just a little slower, the drone would have been lost forever, buried inside the Titanic, and with it, the footage. When the drone finally emerged from that section of the ship, it carried more than images. It carried a warning. The Titanic is no longer stable, not just fragile, unpredictable. Entire sections are now at risk of sudden collapse. Areas once considered safe for exploration are becoming traps. And what lies deeper inside the ship may soon be unreachable, because the most horrifying discovery wasn't something the drone saw. It was the realization that the clock is almost out. The Titanic is not a ruin frozen in time. It is a structure actively destroying itself. The deeper the drone went, the less the ship resembled anything human had built. Corridors stopped making sense. Walls leaned inward at unnatural angles. Floors twisted and buckled, as if the Titanic were slowly curling into itself under the weight of the ocean. This was no longer exploration. It was intrusion into a place that no longer wanted to exist. The drone's lights revealed spaces that had once been sealed off from passengers. Narrow passages, utility shafts, maintenance routes designed for crew who knew the ship by memory, not maps. Here, the air, if it could still be called that, felt heavy even through the screen. This was the inside of a machine that had failed catastrophically. As the drone moved forward, its cameras passed over something strangely familiar. A wall-mounted clock. Its face was warped, the numbers barely visible beneath layers of corrosion. The glass was gone, eaten away long ago. But the hands were still there, frozen. No one knew exactly what time it showed anymore. Whether it marked the moment the power failed, the moment the water reached this level, or some random second long after the sinking. But seeing a clock inside a ship that had been dead for over a century felt wrong. Time had stopped here, yet decay had not. The drone continued, passing through what had once been a junction point. Pipes branched in every direction, some snapped clean in half, others bent and twisted like melted wax. This was where pressure had done its worst. When the Titanic sank, water didn't gently fill the ship, it slammed inward. It crushed air pockets instantly. It tore through compartments with explosive force. Some rooms imploded, others collapsed slowly, tortured by the weight above them. And now, more than 100 years later, those stresses were still unfolding. The drone's camera suddenly caught movement again. Not debris this time. A slow, unnatural ripple along a wall. At first, it looked like fabric moving in a current. But it wasn't fabric. It was rust. Entire sheets of metal peeling away from the structure, lifting slightly as water flowed beneath them. The wall itself was separating from the ship. Scientists watching the feed later described this moment as terrifying for a simple reason. That wall was load-bearing. If it failed completely, everything above it could come down. The drone backed away, adjusting its position carefully, as if it somehow understood the danger. And then it entered one of the most controversial areas of the wreck, a space many believe should never be explored. The crew quarters. These rooms were small, cramped, functional, designed for people who worked endlessly to keep the ship running. Unlike the grand cabins above, these spaces showed no signs of luxury, no decoration, no comfort, just survival. The drone passed through a doorway barely large enough to fit through. Inside, the room was partially intact. A bunk frame lay collapsed against one wall. A metal shelf still clung stubbornly to another. The floor was covered in thick sediment, hiding whatever lay beneath. And then the camera caught something deeply unsettling. A pair of glasses, lenses long gone, frames bent and fragile, resting gently in the silt. Glasses don't fall into place naturally underwater. They settle where they are dropped. Someone had taken these off, maybe before the water reached them. Maybe after realizing escape was impossible. Maybe to see more clearly in the chaos. No one would ever know. The drone lingered for just a moment before moving on, because what came next changed how scientists think about the Titanic entirely. The drone entered a section where the walls were coated in thick web-like formations. Rusticles clung everywhere, hanging from ceilings, stretching across doorways, crawling along pipes. This wasn't random decay, this was biological. The bacteria consuming the Titanic were thriving here far more aggressively than expected. They were feeding on the iron at an alarming rate, and then the drone's instruments registered something unexpected, a temperature difference. Tiny, but measurable, warmer water flowing through cracks in the ship's structure. This suggested something disturbing. As the ship collapses, it creates new pathways for currents. These currents bring oxygen and nutrients directly to the bacteria, accelerating the destruction. In simple terms, the Titanic is helping destroy itself. Every collapse makes the next collapse faster. Every opening feeds the organisms eating it alive. This is not slow decay anymore. It's a chain reaction. The drone moved deeper into a narrow vertical shaft formed by collapsed decks. Light from above faded quickly, replaced by a suffocating darkness broken only by the drone's lamps. This shaft should not exist. It was never part of the design. It was created entirely by failure. As the drone descended, the walls seemed to close in. Beams jutted out at sharp angles. Pieces of ceiling hung loose, barely attached. Then the camera captured something that sent shockwaves through the research team. A large section of wall was missing, not collapse, gone. Behind it was open ocean. The Titanic was no longer sealed here. The sea was actively flowing through the ship, eroding it from the inside every second. This wasn't just a wreck resting on the seafloor, it was becoming part of the ocean itself. The drone hovered at the edge of this opening. Beyond it, darkness stretched endlessly, and in that moment, the horrifying truth became impossible to ignore. The Titanic is not disappearing from the outside in, it is being hollowed out. Soon, there will be nothing left but fragile outlines, ghostly impressions where rooms once existed. Then even those will fail. As the drone began its slow ascent back towards safer areas, the water suddenly filled with particles again. Another collapse. Somewhere deeper inside, metal gave way. The drone did not turn back to look, because by now one thing was clear. The most dangerous place to be is not outside the Titanic, it's inside. The drone did not return the same way it entered. It couldn't. Parts of the ship it had passed through earlier were no longer accessible. Narrow passages had partially collapsed. Openings had narrowed. The Titanic had shifted again, subtly but decisively, as if reacting to the intrusion. This alone disturbed the scientists. The ship was not static, it was responding. As the drone navigated an alternate route, its lights revealed areas closer to the bow section, where the damage from the sinking had been most violent. Here, the destruction felt older, more complete, as if the ship had given up here first. Steel plates were folded inward like crushed paper. Rivets lay scattered across the floor, their original purpose long forgotten. The hull itself appeared torn, not sliced, bent inward by overwhelming force. This was where the ocean had entered first, and it showed. The drone passed a massive crack running vertically along a wall. It wasn't part of the original break when the ship split in two. This fracture had formed later, long after the sinking. It was the result of pressure fatigue, a slow weakening of metal that had spent over a century resisting the weight of the Atlantic. Scientists watching the feed realized something unsettling. If this crack continued to grow, entire sections of the bow could fail at once, not gradually, suddenly. The drone drifted closer to what had once been a storage area. Metal crates lay crushed beneath fallen beams. Their contents had long since dissolved or scattered, leaving only corroded shells. And then, against one wall, something unexpected appeared. A door. Closed. Almost intact. Doors inside the Titanic are rarely found like this. Most were torn off their hinges or crushed beyond recognition during the sinking or by later collapses. This one had survived. The drone hovered in front of it, lights steady. No one knew what lay behind it. No records showed what this compartment had been used for. No maps matched its location precisely anymore. The ship had changed too much. Slowly, the drone nudged closer. The door creaked slightly as water flowed around it. Then, with the smallest movement, it swung inward. Inside was emptiness, not debris, not collapse, just space, a pocket the ocean hadn't fully claimed yet. The walls were thin, the ceiling low, rust covered every surface, but the structure still held, for now. And in the center of the room, resting on the floor, was something deeply unsettling. A life vest, not intact, not wearable, but unmistakable. The cork lining had disintegrated, leaving behind fabric fragments clinging weakly together. The straps were gone, the shape barely recognizable, but there was no doubt, this was personal. Someone had carried it here. Why? Had they hoped to find shelter? Had they become disoriented as water rushed in? Had they believed this room might somehow save them? No answer existed. The drone backed away slowly, because this space felt wrong, like a place that should have stayed sealed. As it exited, the drone's sensors detected a change in current again. Water flow intensified slightly, pushing inward through new gaps forming somewhere nearby. This wasn't coincidence. The Titanic structure was weakening faster than expected. In some areas, collapse was accelerating. The drone followed the current, tracing it back to its source. What it found confirmed the worst fears. A massive section of internal wall had begun to separate completely from the surrounding structure. The gap wasn't wide yet, but it was growing. With every shift of water, the opening widened by fractions of an inch. This wall supported multiple decks above it. If it failed, entire levels could drop in a single cascade. The Titanic wouldn't crumble quietly. It would give way all at once. Scientists later compared this to a landslide waiting for the final grain of sand to fall. The drone moved away from the danger zone, capturing as much footage as possible before retreating. On its path back, it passed through another once familiar space, a dining area, or what remained of it. Tables were gone, chairs unrecognizable. The floor was uneven, broken by deep cracks and sudden drops. But against one wall, something still clung stubbornly to place. A section of decorative paneling, carved wood darkened and fragile, its patterns barely visible beneath rust and sediment. This detail hit hard. It reminded researchers that this had once been beautiful, that this wasn't just metal and machinery. It was a place where people laughed, ate meals, talked about the future. Now it was collapsing in silence. The drone continued upward, heading toward the opening it would use to exit the ship. And that's when it happened. Without warning, the water filled with movement. A violent surge of particles, rust, debris, sediment. Visibility dropped to zero. The drone stabilizers fought to hold position. Somewhere nearby, something big had failed. Metal scraped, not loudly, but unmistakably. The camera caught only flashes, twisted beams falling past, walls giving way, entire sections collapsing into darkness. This was not slow decay, this was structural failure. When visibility finally returned, the space the drone had just passed through was gone. Collapsed, sealed. The drone had escaped by seconds. Later analysis confirmed it. An entire internal section had caved in, sealing off multiple rooms forever. No future drone would be able to enter those spaces. They were gone, erased. And this led scientists to a chilling conclusion. The Titanic is not going to fade away gently. It is approaching a tipping point. When enough internal supports fail, large portions of the wreck could collapse in a single event, possibly triggered by nothing more than a strong current or shifting sediment. When that happens, history will disappear in moments. The drone finally pulled away from the wreck. Slowly, reluctantly, As it exited the broken hull, the Titanic faded back into darkness behind it, swallowed once more by the cold, crushing Atlantic. What the drone carried back to the surface was not just footage, it was a warning. For years, people believed the Titanic would remain on the ocean floor for centuries, that it would rust slowly, gently, like a forgotten monument. That belief is wrong. What the drone revealed is that the Titanic is entering its final stage. Not decades from now, not centuries from now. Soon. The ship is no longer a solid structure. It is a fragile shell held together by weakened beams and corroded joints. The bacteria eating it are accelerating the destruction. Water flows freely through its interior, carving new paths, undermining what little support remains. The Titanic is collapsing from the inside out. Scientists studying the footage noticed something deeply troubling. Many of the ship's remaining, load-bearing sections are close to failure at the same time. This means the end will not be gradual, it will be sudden. One strong current, one internal collapse, one shift in sediment, and entire sections could fall in a chain reaction. The bow could cave inward, the decks could pancake, the remaining walls could crumble into nothing. When that happens, the Titanic will not look like a ship anymore. It will become a scattered outline of debris indistinguishable from the ocean floor. And once that happens, it can never be studied again. This raises a question that divides scientists, historians, and explorers. Should humans keep going inside? Some argue that exploration accelerates destruction, that every drone, every current disturbance, every vibration contributes to collapse, that the Titanic should be left alone to decay in peace. Others believe time is running out, that this may be the last chance to document what remains, to learn from the ship's construction, its failure, and the human stories frozen inside its walls, because the Titanic is more than metal. It is a record of ambition, of confidence, of belief that technology had conquered nature, and the ocean has spent more than 100 years proving otherwise. What the drone found inside wasn't horror in the form of creatures or curses. It was something far more unsettling, proof that nothing humans build is permanent, that even our greatest achievements can be erased quietly, patiently, without anger or drama. Just pressure, time, and water. One day soon, future explorers may return to the coordinates where the Titanic rests, and find almost nothing. No hallways, no rooms, no recognizable shape. Just rust-stained sediment and fragments scattered across the seafloor. The ship that was called unsinkable will finally be gone. Not with a final collapse anyone witnesses, not with a dramatic ending, but with silence. The drone's journey inside the Titanic may have been one of the last times anyone sees the ship as a structure at all, because the truth is this: the Titanic isn't waiting to be discovered anymore, it's disappearing. And the ocean always finishes what it starts.